We are now joined by Dr. Kumi Naidoo. He is Executive Director of Greenpeace and speaker at this year's Gallen Symposium. Dr. Naidoo, thank you very much for granting us some of your time.
Thank you for having me.
As the Executive Director of the most renowned NGO in the world, Greenpeace, how would you describe the differences in risk taken at Greenpeace compared to the ones taken in the corporate world?
Well, firstly, I think the corporate leadership today are strangulated by what I call the tyranny of quarterly reporting cycles, which means that they are driven by a very short-term perspective of returning maximum return to investors. When you look at Greenpeace and most other NGOs, we actually take a more long-term view, and we have a greater sense of what I would call intergenerational solidarity and justice. Because sadly, too many of the corporate leaders either put themselves under risks or believe that they're under risk to deliver in the short term. So they take excessive risk, irresponsible risk, which actually damages all of society. So that's one big difference. The second difference is that I think that Greenpeace believes very strongly that the problem we have right now is what psychologists will call cognitive dissonance, which means that all the facts are there, that we are heading to a massive crash, but politicians and business leaders are not willing to acknowledge it. So today, what business and Greenpeace would have in common is that today everybody agrees with what Greenpeace was saying 20, 30 years ago, right? But just because they speak a green language, just because they agree that climate change is a threat to our children's future, doesn't mean that the solutions and the level of ambition to address the climate crisis, to address the environmental crisis, is at the level at which the science says we need to be. The difference with Greenpeace is that the science tells us that we are running out of time, we need to act fast, and we, I believe, are more led by the science and the consensus in science than the business community appears to be.
You saw your personal life at risk while organizing anti-apartheid activities that finally forced you into exile. To which extent does this experience influence your personal attitude towards risk-taking?
I think for those of us who are in positions of leadership, in a world that is going through right now what some have called the perfect storm, in a book I published last year, I've called it a boiling point, which essentially is the convergence of a range of crises in a very short, concentrated time span. Food price, fuel price, poverty, climate, financial, and so on. And I think when leaders have to address the reality that our planet as we know it today will not be there for our children and grandchildren, then leadership does actually, under extreme conditions of injustice or extreme conditions of lack of leadership and political will, leadership must step forward in a way that, in the current context, must mean that we are willing to put our lives on the line. Because if you take what history teaches us about how humanity has addressed the biggest global challenges or injustices that we face, whether it's slavery, colonialism, women's right to vote, civil rights in the United States, apartheid as a global issue, not just a South African issue. If you take all of these issues, when you ask the question, when did these struggles move forward? These struggles only move forward and decent men and women stepped up and said enough is enough and no more. We're prepared to go to prison if necessary. We're prepared to put our lives on the line if necessary. I have very much that attitude of leadership, and that is why I feel that if our activists are getting arrested and spending time in prison for standing up for social and environmental justice, as a leader I must also put myself on the line. Today, most of our leaders are sending our young people off to war in Iran and Afghanistan and so on, while they protect their own children, they protect themselves. We need a different kind of leadership, and I think the experience from South Africa, where our leaders were willing to put themselves on the line, and where I myself was thrown in that position, is an inspiration for the kind of leadership needed in the current context. We do not need leadership which takes baby steps in the right direction. We need leadership that is transformative and that is at the level of ambition given the scale of the crisis we face.
we hope that you will come back to the St. Gallen Symposium in the future. What do you think will be discussed at the symposium in 2022, 10 years from now?
Well, I think there's a pessimistic and an optimistic view. Pessimistically, if we do not act with the urgency to address the multiple crises, particularly the climate crisis that we actually face right now, I think if we don't do it, then 10 years from now, we will be saying, why did we miss the opportunity? Because the door of the opportunity is closing, and we will be sort of hitting ourselves in the back and being brutal with ourselves for failing our children and grandchildren's future, because that is what is at stake here. But we could be having a positive conference on the other hand. If in fact we do what the science says, we do what most politicians, when you speak to them face to face, will tell you that we have to act, time is running out. If we do all of these things, which is, I believe, within the capability of humanity, if our leaders act with the political will that is necessary, then I think 10 years from now we'll be saying, progress made, what more do we need to do? Right? So 10 years from now we'll be saying, let's look at what progress we've made in the last decade, and let's be very clear, there will be much more to do, because this crisis of climate and poverty and finance and economy and so on, sadly, they're not going to go away tomorrow.
Dr. Naidoo, thank you very much for your time and enjoy your stay here at the St. Gallen Symposium.
Thank you very much for having me.